The History of Gunpowder, the Elixir that Learned to Kill. May 29th, 1453, just before dawn, and the ground itself seems to inhale. Not a bell, not a trumpet. A held breath before something no wall on earth has ever survived. The camera would find it low, at ankle height, where the fuse burns orange against wet stone. A hand, just a forearm really, sleeve rolled, knuckles pale, steadies a torch above a touch hole the width of a fist. Sulfur bites the air, sharp and eggish, mixed with wet rope and hot bronze. Somewhere behind the gun, men are shouting orders in Ottoman Turkish, but the sound is thin, distant, unimportant. What matters is the black paste packed into the barrel of a cannon, 27 feet long, a thing so large it reportedly took 60 oxen and hundreds of men several weeks to drag it from Adrianople to these walls. The walls belong to Constantinople. They have stood for 1100 years. No army, not Persian, not Arab, not Bulgar, had ever broken the great land walls by force, though Crusader forces did breach the city's sea defenses in 1204. The men who built them believed they were building something permanent. Stone does not lie about permanence. It simply waits to be proven wrong. The gunner steps back. The torch touches the hole. What happens in the next 3 seconds will end the Byzantine Empire, close the medieval world, and answer a question nobody in that army has thought to ask. Who actually built this weapon, and why did he build it for the wrong side first? We will come back to that question. It matters more than it sounds like it should. To understand what is about to happen to these walls, we have to go back roughly 600 years, to a place with no cannons, no armies, no walls under siege at all. A quiet room in Tang Dynasty China, where a group of alchemists is not trying to make a weapon. They are trying to make a person live forever. Legend says the search for immortality drove Chinese alchemy for centuries. Elixirs of gold, of jade dust, of mercury swallowed in the belief that a metal that does not rust could make flesh that does not die. Some emperors, the legend goes, actually died from drinking these preparations, poisoned by the very substances meant to save them. That part is often told as folklore, and historians treat the death toll as difficult to verify precisely. What the written record actually preserves is smaller, stranger, and far more specific. A Taoist text known as the Zhen Yuan Miao Dao Yao Lu, dated by most historians to around the 9th century, includes a warning. It describes a mixture of sulfur, saltpeter, and a third ingredient. Some translations say ralgar, others honey used with charcoal, that when combined and heated catches fire so fast it burns the hands and face of the person handling it, and in at least one recorded case burns down the building it was made in. Listen to that sentence again. The oldest surviving written reference to the formula behind gunpowder is not a weapon design. It is a safety warning. Someone was hurt badly enough, and often enough, that another alchemist felt the need to write it down. Do not do this the way I did. Nobody in that room in the 9th century believed they had discovered anything except a mistake. The elixir of eternal life had, instead, produced something that could take life away in an instant. That irony sat quietly for roughly 200 years before anyone thought to point it at another human being on purpose. By 1044, the mistake had a manual. A Song Dynasty military compendium called the Wu Jingzong Yao, compiled under orders from Emperor Renzong by a scholar named Zhang Gongliang, records the earliest known formulas for gunpowder intended explicitly for war. Not one recipe, but 3, with slightly different ratios for different purposes: fire arrows, smoke bombs, incendiary grenades hurled from catapults. The alchemist's mistake had become a category of state-sponsored technology, written down, standardized, taught. Here is the first turn of the screw. Because early Chinese gunpowder was not yet powerful enough to launch a projectile the way a modern gun does. It burned. It did not yet explode with the force needed to hurl solid iron a great distance. For that, someone needed to raise the ratio of saltpeter, the ingredient that supplies oxygen to the burn, high enough to turn slow fire into fast, violent expansion. That refinement took another century of trial, and it produced something the song called the fire lance. Picture a siege in 1132 at a city called Dayan during a war between the Song and the invading Jin. Chinese records describe a bamboo tube packed with gunpowder, mounted on a spear, lit and thrust forward, throwing flame and shrapnel at the attacker scaling the walls. It is not yet a gun in the way we mean the word. It is closer to a flamethrower on a stick. But historians of technology, including Joseph Needham, who spent decades cataloging Chinese scientific history, consider the Dayan fire lance a direct ancestor of the guns that followed. Among the first known instances of gunpowder being used to project something forward, out of a tube at a human enemy, rather than simply to burn or explode where it sat. Something invented to cheat death had now been redesigned, deliberately, to deliver it faster. The second escalation did not stay in China. It rode west on horseback. The Mongol conquests of the 13th century moved across Asia faster than almost any military campaign in recorded history, and they carried gunpowder weapons with them. Fire arrows, exploding shells, incendiary bombs used in sieges from northern China to the borders of Europe. Along the same trade routes the Mongols controlled, the technology reached the Islamic world. A Syrian engineer named Hassan al-Ramah wrote a treatise around 1280 describing gunpowder formulas, refined with a new purification process for saltpeter, along with early rocket designs he called Chinese arrows, a title that, quietly, admits exactly where the knowledge came from. Notice what has happened by this point. A monk's fire safety warning has become a Song military manual, has become a battlefield weapon, has become an internationally traded technology moving faster than any single government could control it, and it still has not reached Europe. Historians still debate exactly how gunpowder crossed that last distance, whether it arrived through direct contact along Mongol trade networks, through Arab intermediaries in Spain and Sicily, or, as some argue, through independent rediscovery by a European scholar working from incomplete fragments of the same underlying chemistry. What we do have is a name attached to the first clear European reference, Roger Bacon, an English friar, writing around 12067 in a work usually called the Opus Majus, includes a passage describing an explosive substance and, this is the detail that keeps historians arguing, encodes part of the actual formula inside a Latin anagram, as if he wanted the knowledge preserved but not casually shared. Why hide it? Bacon never explained. Some scholars think he feared the Church's suspicion of anything resembling forbidden knowledge. Others think he simply understood, better than most men of his century, exactly what this substance could do in the wrong hands, and wanted to slow it down. It did not slow down for long. By 1326, an English manuscript known as the Walter de Millamete text contains the earliest surviving European illustration of a cannon, a vase-shaped device called a pot de fer, firing what looks like a large arrow, with a small figure leaning away from it, clearly bracing for the noise. 20 years later, at the Battle of Crécy in 1346, English forces are recorded using early cannons against French cavalry. Historians debate how much actual damage those first, crude, unreliable guns did on that particular field, probably less than the longbow beside them. But the psychological effect, the noise, the smoke, the sheer unfamiliarity of thunder produced by human hands, is recorded by multiple chroniclers as having genuinely unsettled the French knights and their horses. Within another century, European gunsmiths had solved one of gunpowder's oldest problems. Loose black powder, mixed as fine dust, tended to separate during transport. The heavier saltpeter settling to the bottom, the lighter charcoal rising, so that a barrel that ignited perfectly in the workshop might fizzle uselessly on the battlefield after a journey by cart and ship. The fix, developed gradually through the 14th and 15th centuries, was corning, wetting the mixture into a paste, then drying and breaking it into small, uniform grains. Corned powder burned faster, stored better, and traveled without falling apart. It is, in essence, the same physical form of gunpowder still manufactured today. By the middle of the 15th century, gunpowder is no longer a curiosity, a court secret, or a battlefield novelty. It is an industry with specialists, supply chains, and, crucially for our story, freelance engineers willing to sell their skills to whichever ruler will pay for them. Which brings us back to the walls of Constantinople, and to the man whose name almost nobody in that torchlit scene actually knows. His name was Orban, and depending on which chronicler you trust, he is most often described as Hungarian, though a few accounts place his origin in Transylvania. He was, by every surviving account, a master founder, a man who understood how to cast bronze into shapes strong enough to survive being packed with explosive force and lit on fire over and over without shattering. And here is the turn. According to the Byzantine chronicler Michael Kritovoulos, writing not long after these events, Orban first offered his services to the Byzantine Emperor Constantine XI, to the very city those walls belonged to. Constantinople needed cannons. It needed them badly. But the empire's treasury, hollowed out by centuries of war, trade collapse, and shrinking territory, could not pay Orban what he asked, and by some accounts could not even supply him with enough bronze to cast a gun of the size he proposed. So Orban left. He walked or rode to the court of the young Ottoman Sultan Mehmed II, a ruler who wanted Constantinople more than any Ottoman leader before him, and who, unlike the emperor he was about to besiege, had both the treasury and the will to fund whatever Orban asked for. Mehmed reportedly paid him 4 times his requested salary and gave him the materials to build not one cannon but an entire foundry's worth, including the enormous bombard the Ottomans would later call the Basilica, the very gun lighting the fuse in the opening of this story. Sit with that for a moment. The city about to be broken by this weapon is, by the historical record, the same city that had first chanced to own it, and could not afford the price. The man who built the instrument of Constantinople's fall had knocked on Constantinople's own door first. Historians debate the finer details, the exact wages, the precise sequence of Orban's negotiations, whether Kritovoulos, writing for a Byzantine audience already grieving the loss of their capital, shaped the story to sting a little harder in hindsight. But the broad outline, an engineer rejected by Byzantium and embraced by the Ottomans, appears across multiple independent sources close to the event, and most scholars of the siege accept it as substantially accurate. Now go back to the smell of sulfur, the wet rope, the torch touching the hole. The basilica, according to accounts from the siege, could fire a stone ball that some sources describe as roughly 600 pounds, though other contemporary estimates run higher, and modern historians treat the exact weight as difficult to confirm given how differently ancient chroniclers estimated mass. What is not disputed is the effect. The gun could reportedly be fired only a handful of times a day. Some accounts say as few as 7, because the barrel needed hours to cool between shots or it risked cracking apart and killing its own crew. Loading took a small army of men working in careful, practiced silence, packing the powder, ramming the stone, clearing the area before the torch ever came near. And when it fired, witnesses on both sides described the same thing. The sound reached villages miles away. Pregnant women in the city, according to the chronicler Delcas, reportedly went into shock at the noise. The Theodosian walls, unbreached in 11 centuries by any siege engine ever built, began to crack, then crumble, section by section, over the weeks of bombardment that followed. On May 29, 1453, after weeks of this pounding, the Ottoman forces finally broke through near the gate of St. Romanus. Constantine XI, the last emperor in a line of succession symbolically traced back to Augustus, is recorded by multiple sources as having thrown off his imperial regalia and charged into the final fighting as an ordinary soldier, refusing to be captured. His body was never conclusively identified afterward. The city that had outlasted the Roman Empire's western half by nearly 1,000 years fell in a single morning to a weapon its own emperor had once been offered, and once turned away. Something built as a mistake in a Chinese alchemist's workshop had, in 600 years, ended an empire that had outlived Rome itself. The consequences did not stop with one city. Gunpowder made the medieval castle obsolete within a generation. Walls that had protected nobility for centuries could now be broken by anyone with enough gold to buy a cannon and enough patience to aim it. That single shift helped redraw the balance of power across Europe. Kings who could afford artillery could bring rebellious nobles to heel in ways their ancestors never could, which historians point to as one of several forces that helped concentrate power into centralized nation-states over the following 2 centuries. It changed the sea, too. By the 16th century, ships bristling with cannon on both sides had made naval combat, and with it the ability to project force across oceans, the deciding factor in which European powers could build empires that spanned the globe. The powder that started as a monk's mistake in a Tang Dynasty workshop was, by then, quietly deciding who got to colonize whom. And it never stopped evolving. In 1847, an Italian chemist named Ascanio Sobrero synthesized nitroglycerin, a liquid explosive far more powerful and far more unstable than black powder, so unstable that Sobrero himself reportedly refused to work with it again after an accident injured him. 2 decades later, a Swedish engineer named Alfred Nobel found a way to stabilize nitroglycerin by absorbing it into a porous mineral called kieselguhr, creating dynamite in 1867. A controllable, transportable version of an explosive too dangerous to use safely before him. Dynamite is chemically its own invention, not literally gunpowder, but it belongs to the same lineage of human effort. Take something that wants to explode all at once and teach it, painstakingly, to explode on command instead. Today, roughly a millennium and a half after that first burnt hand in a Chinese alchemist's workshop, the descendants of that mixture are everywhere, mostly invisible. Mining explosives clear tunnels through mountains for roads and railways. Controlled demolition brings down aging buildings in seconds, safely, block by calculated block. And every summer, in cities across the world, families gather on blankets and rooftops to watch fireworks, displays whose core chemistry, the ratio of saltpeter, charcoal, and sulfur, has not fundamentally changed since Song Dynasty craftsmen packed bamboo tubes for festivals more than 1,000 years ago. China remains the largest producer of fireworks on Earth, with the city of Luoyang alone manufacturing a significant share of the world's supply, a direct, living inheritance of the very formula that was first written down as a warning against getting hurt. That is, quietly, the reason this story still matters to anyone watching it tonight instead of reading it in a textbook. Every fireworks show on a summer evening, every controlled blast clearing rock for a new road, every cartridge fired at a shooting range, is running on essentially the same principle an alchemist stumbled into while trying to cheat death. We inherited both halves of that irony without asking for either. The wonder and the danger arrived together, in the same jar, and they have never fully separated since. If you strip away the empires and the dates, 3 things are worth carrying with you. A safety warning written to stop people from hurting themselves became, within 2 centuries, one of the most consequential weapons in medieval history. The engineer who ended an 1100-year-old empire had tried, first, to save it, and simply couldn't afford the price of loyalty. And the same chemistry that broke the walls of Constantinople now lights up the sky over harbors and stadiums every New Year's Eve, cheered rather than feared, its danger dressed up a celebration. So, here is the question worth sitting with. If the alchemists who first mixed sulfur, saltpeter, and charcoal had known exactly what their mistake would eventually become, would they have burned the recipe instead of writing it down? And when you watch fireworks explode over a dark sky this year, will you still be able to hear underneath the applause the faint echo of a wall falling in 1453? Main sources for this story include Joseph Needham's Science and Civilization in China, the Byzantine chronicles of Michael Kritovoulos and Dukas on the Siege of Constantinople, and Jack Kelly's Gunpowder, Alchemy, Bungling, and the Accidental Discovery That Changed the World. The full list is in the description.